Hi everyone, and thanks for giving up some of your time this evening to come along and listen to a couple of talks about the seaweed. I'm Martha, and I'm a nutrition research scientist by training with a particular interest in seaweed. And today what I want to do is really put seaweed in the spotlight and talk to you a little bit about some of my research into the availability, safety, and consumer perceptions of seaweed in the UK. So I just wanted to get started by disclosing any potential conflicts of interest, which also serves as a bit of an intro and provides some information on my background. So I finished my PhD last year. I was supervised by Emily, who introduced the webinar. And my PhD was funded by the University of Glasgow and in its latter stages, a grant from the Rank Prize funds. Since then, I've worked on a couple of research projects, some of them in collaboration with seaweed companies. And I've also worked as part of the SCAF team, supporting them with their communications. But currently I work for Danone, UK and Ireland as a nutrition manager, where I'm responsible for looking after our UK and Ireland portfolio of products along with the rest of the nutrition team. But I also hold an honorary role at the University of Glasgow as a research assistant, and that's the capacity that I'll be giving this talk this evening. So I wanted to start off by briefly explaining how I think that seaweed has an awful lot of potential as a food. So it's often quite high in beneficial dietary components like fiber, proteins, and vitamins and minerals. And an example of this is that seaweed provides a plant-based source of iodine, which I'll talk more about, and vitamin B12. Seaweeds can also be used to extract hydrocolloids like alginate, agar, and carrageenan, and these are often used by the food industry for their gelling properties. And generally, seaweed is quite a versatile ingredient that can be used fresh or dried in a real variety of foods. And from an environmental perspective, and to give a bit of a sustainability angle as well, seaweeds tend to have much lower inputs than terrestrial crops, and they really only need seawater and sunlight to grow, so don't use up the same land, fresh water, or fertilizer as other crops or foods might. But it is worth noting that the iodine content in seaweeds is very variable, both within and between species, and can actually be really high in some cases. So I've just popped some examples on the side here where kelp can have an iodine content of anywhere between 150 and 6,500 micrograms per gram of seaweed. And nori, which is the seaweed that you often see wrapped around sushi rolls, has much lower iodine content at between 30 and 40 micrograms. And in some cases, this high iodine content can actually be quite problematic in the context of health. And I want to very briefly explain the relationship between iodine and health as well, so you have a background on that. On the screen, you can see a really simple graph, which is showing iodine exposure across the x-axis at the bottom, and then the risk of negative health consequences on the y-axis on the side. And in the middle here, there's this green box that's really highlighting adequate iodine intake of around 150 micrograms per day for an adult. And iodine is a really important micronutrient because it's a component of your thyroid hormones, and these are used to regulate a lot of metabolic processes within the body. So you can see that the curve on this graph is what we would call U-shaped, which put very simply means that at very, very low or very, very high iodine intakes, the risk of thyroid health issues and the risk of negative consequences is increased. And using seaweed as a source of iodine has benefits and risks, and it can really contribute to iodine intakes across this exposure spectrum. So for people with habitually low iodine intake, like people who maybe exclude other iodine sources such as dairy and fish, seaweed can actually be a really valuable source of plant-based iodine. And then generally speaking, for the majority of people who have adequate iodine nutrition, seaweed can be a really enjoyable addition to diets as well as an iodine source. But on the other end of the spectrum, for people who maybe already have very high iodine intakes or who routinely overconsume seaweed, there is a risk of iodine excess and the associated thyroid dysfunction that comes with that. And my PhD broadly focused on the relationships between seaweed, iodine, and health across this exposure spectrum. And I want to talk to you today about two of the studies that I worked on. So I'm going to start off by discussing a little bit about seaweed availability in the UK and provide a bit more insight into the iodine content of the products that are available on the market. To provide a little bit of background, there has been some research into seaweed availability and iodine content in both the UK and Europe already. So around 10 years ago now, Emily and one of her PhD students conducted a market survey in the UK which identified over 200 products, and they had quite a high iodine content of around 585 micrograms per serving, which is very close to the tolerable upper limit for iodine. And they also identified fairly poor iodine labeling practices among these products. A couple of years later in Italy, when a selection of seaweed products were collected and analysed for iodine content, this team found that dried seaweed products had the highest iodine content at nearly 2 times the tolerable upper limit per gram of seaweed. And then in 2019, a Norwegian research team analysed seaweed products that are available on the Norwegian market, and they found the iodine content was very variable in both foods and supplements. So you can see that the highest iodine content in food products was many, many times above the tolerable upper limit, and over half the products would actually deliver an excessive iodine dose in a single serving. So what we wanted to do was to explore the current market for seaweed food products in the UK and provide a little bit of an update to the market survey from 2014. And we did this using a systematic online search of supermarket, health store, and brand websites in 3 distinct waves between 2018 and 2021. And we collected data on product type, what sort of seaweeds were included in these products, their iodine content, and some other metrics like price and packaging size. And in the first wave in 2018, what we saw was that there are around 450 products on the market, which represented a nearly 2-fold increase from the 2014 survey. And in the following wave, which was in 2019, we noted a further increase in products. But what we also saw was a lot of dynamism in the market. So around 1/3 of the products from the previous wave had actually been lost completely. And that was offset by a lot of new product entering the market. And then in wave 3, although we didn't see a huge increase in products, we saw very similar dynamism here, with a loss of around 170 products that was offset by a similar number of novel products entering the market. And alongside this dynamism, we also saw a real diversity in the products that were on offer. So from seaweed and quite predictable products like sushi, to seaweed that was included in salts or condiments, seaweed that was integrated into snacks or more staple foods like pasta, or seaweed sold as dietary supplements. And to provide a couple of key insights here, we saw a price increase from £4 to around £5.50 across the 3 waves, with supplements always being more expensive than foods. And alongside this price increase, we also saw a small packaging size decrease, which meant that consumers were getting slightly less product for a little bit more money. In terms of product origin, this was quite poorly defined, with between 40 and 50% of products in each wave providing no origin information. And for those that did, they were mostly from the UK or Asia. And we also looked at the type of seaweed included in products, which, like the products themselves, was very diverse, but kelp and nori were quite commonly used. A lot of products actually didn't specify the type of seaweed that they used, instead just listing seaweed as an ingredient. And this is quite a problematic practice in the context of iodine exposure, because as I mentioned previously, the iodine content of seaweeds can actually vary a lot between species. And when we looked at the iodine content in the foods and supplements we'd identified, it was quite high at around 400 micrograms for foods and over 1,000 for supplements per serving by wave 3. Most of the products we found didn't provide any direct information on iodine content, so for a lot of them we had to estimate this based on seaweed iodine content values that were available in the literature and the proportion of seaweed in each product. So on these graphs, which is split by foods on the left and supplements on the right, we've got the survey waves across the x-axis and the iodine dose per serving up the y-axis. And each one of these coloured violin box plot combinations represents a single wave of the survey. So starting with the initial 2014 survey on the left in purple, and then ending with the most recent 2021 survey on the right in yellow. And what I really want to draw your attention to on these graphs is this red dotted line that's intersecting them, and that represents the tolerable upper limit for iodine. So you can see that just one serving of a lot of the food and supplement products actually sits above this line. And across the 3 most recent waves, around 14 to 17% of all of the products that we identified in each survey wave had an iodine content over the tolerable upper limit. So that really highlights that there is a risk of iodine overexposure from seaweed products that are currently available on the market. And that brings me back to the question that I posed at the start of this section of the talk. Is seaweed something that's available to purchase, and is it something that's safe? So yes, seaweed is very, very readily available in a variety of food and supplement products on the UK market. But when we start to think about the safety of the product, although it's definitely true that some do have a high iodine content, the actual safety depends on other factors too. So, for example, how much of that seaweed is released from the food matrix during digestion, or how often the product's consumed. Which brings me on to the next part of this talk, which will focus a little bit on seaweed consumption habits in the UK, and will provide some further insights into how often people eat seaweed and what consumers really think about it as a food. So there has been research on seaweed consumption in Europe previously, and I just wanted to highlight a couple of those studies for reference. In the UK, a research team in Wales found that more familiar foods that included seaweed, so for example, pizza or pasta, were deemed more acceptable by consumers. And then in the Netherlands, only a very small proportion of survey respondents noted that they would actively choose a seaweed-based snack over one that was made of much more familiar ingredients like meat or pulses. And then in a Norwegian tasting study where chefs made fish cakes using sugar kelp or parsley, both of them actually received the same ratings for fish cake appearance and flavour, but the chefs in the study noted that they thought that traditional cultural frameworks that existed around food might act as a barrier to seaweed inclusion in Norwegian diets. And then finally in Italy, 3/4 of consumers said that they'd be willing to eat seaweed, and over half of them had tried it previously. So I think from this, it's quite clear that seaweed isn't a total no-go food for European consumers, but we wanted to know a little bit more about seaweed consumption and attitudes towards seaweed in the UK. So we designed an online survey to explore this. We recruited around 1,000 UK adults and asked them questions about how often people ate seaweed, how they chose to eat it, and what their general thoughts were on seaweed as a food. And in terms of respondents, our respondents were mostly female, which is quite common in online surveys. They were majority white British in a fairly similar proportion to the general population and also fairly young. Most of our respondents had consumed seaweed in the past year, around 85%, and about 2/3 of them reported that they consumed seaweed monthly. But generally, the median consumption frequency was quite low at only 0.8 servings per month. And then when we looked at the kind of format for seaweed consumption, perhaps unsurprisingly, sushi was the most common way to consume seaweed, followed by seaweed included in kind of whole dried seaweed snacks or seaweed in a soup like miso. And we went on to ask consumers to provide 3 words that came to their mind when they thought about seaweed as a food. And what we saw from this was that their responses were quite mixed. So this word cloud is a word cloud of all of the responses, which has been categorized with a sentiment analysis lexicon into either positive or negative categories. So the negative words are shown on the top in yellow, and then the positive words are shown on the bottom in green. And the size of the word in the word cloud corresponds to how many times it was mentioned. So on the negative half of this word cloud, I think some key insights from that were that a lot of the negative words seem to be highlighting that people thought that seaweed was either unusual or unappealing or a little bit weird. And there were also a lot of descriptors in there about the sensory properties of seaweed. So things like smelly or bitter or slimy. And then on the more positive side, I think the positive words really highlight the perceived benefits of seaweed to health and the environment, but also there are some words in there that really describe its versatility as a food, so things like adaptable or flexible or versatile. And we then went on to ask respondents what would encourage you to eat more seaweed and what would stop you from eating seaweed. And a thematic analysis identified 5 main, barriers and drivers around eating seaweed. So on the barrier side, we saw that concerns around cost and availability really dominated here, as well as worries about the potential negative impact of seaweed on health. And again, sensory properties came back, so words like slimy and smelly were mentioned. And consumers also noted that they weren't really aware of how to use seaweed in recipes or include it in their cooking. And interestingly, we found that the factors that would lead to increased seaweed consumption were actually really similar. So consumers noted that if they knew that seaweed had a positive effect on health, they'd be more likely to eat it. If it was something that was more available, if it was something that was more affordable, and also if it had pleasant sensory aspects and if they had knowledge of how to use it in their cooking. And so with the consumer survey, we've answered the second part of this question. So yes, consumers in the UK do eat seaweed, but it's not something that they eat very regularly. And when they do, it's mostly in the form of sushi. And then regarding their perceptions, it's really clear that views on seaweed are quite mixed, but essentially it does look like consumers want seaweed to be something that's easy and economical to buy. They want seaweeds to taste good, and they want to understand firstly how to use it in cooking or include it in recipes, and secondly, whether there are any health benefits or risks to eating seaweed. And that brings me to the end of the talk. I just wanted to provide a couple of take-home messages, and I think my take-home message very much depends on who you are. So if you are a member of the public, if you've never tried seaweed before and you're interested in trying seaweed, then I think my message is to go for it. There's so many different options to try seaweed, as I showed in the market survey. But if you do, to bear in mind that more doesn't always equal better. So there is a risk of iodine exposure, especially with very high iodine seaweeds like kelps or supplements that are designed to be taken very regularly. So if you can, and if it's available on pack, then check the iodine content. And if it's not, then perhaps don't overconsume those products. If you're involved in the seaweed food industry, either as a grower or a food producer, to me, it looks like British consumers are really interested in seaweeds, but they want to understand a bit more about it in general and be able to access it at a reasonable price point. The market survey highlighted that there is a risk of iodine excess from some products. So if it's something that you can do, please measure and report the iodine content on pack so that consumers can make informed decisions. And ideally keep the iodine dose below 600 micrograms per serving to reduce any risks of iodine overexposure. And then if you're a researcher, if you're interested in conducting seaweed research, I think there is an emerging picture of how seaweed might be able to benefit our health, but we do need a bit more research to better understand what place seaweeds have in modern British diets, but also to explore any potential health effects so it can be safely integrated into more foods. And ultimately, as in any discussion around food, I think it's worth noting that all of us as stakeholders in this are interconnected, and that what we really need to do is keep an open dialogue. So to go back to Emily's intro at the start of the webinar, I think that being part of organisations like SCAF is a really great way to connect with people who are outside your immediate discipline and sector. And that's not just to build your network, but also to gain a better understanding of any shared challenges or opportunities that might exist in the field that we work in. So that concludes my talk. I've collated some resources if you're interested in learning a little bit more about seaweed and health. I think the slides are going to be shared after the webinar so you can access links. And otherwise, I'm very happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting us. And as Emily has said, I'm speaking on behalf of Sarah Cottin, that is my colleague, that she just had a breakdown in their car in their way home, so that's fine. So, but I'm still a part of the project, so I hope that I will be able to give you some information on what we are doing on the seaweed projects. That we have a couple of and we had also a couple of seaweed related projects. So the talk is about seaweed as a sustainable and nutritional food ingredient. So let's go to the next slide. So why seaweed? First of all, as now is the current topic, is for the sustainability. Sustainability, as probably already as touched from the previous speakers, they do not need at all fresh waters. That is one of the main concerns, especially around the world. Probably not so much in Scotland, because we are able to export water from almost to all UK. So we don't need the fertilizer. We don't need arable land. It's just a gift from nature. You know, as a nutrition, they are fantastic. As a nutrition, they are a great source of minerals, iodium, magnesium, antioxidants, also some source of protein. That is also another big issue nowadays, because we are always struggling to find sustainable source of protein. And of course, you can represent, we can call as a blue ocean. Blue ocean is not anything related to the sea, but is a growing market with very low competitors. Because if we're speaking about marketing, we can generally speak about two types of ocean. Ocean is the red ocean, where it's full of blood, where each industry is going to fight against the other, or the blue ocean, where actually you have no competitors, and that is probably is the market of the seaweeds. In general, we can have the main three type of seaweed are the brown, the red, and the green. They are different in terms of nutritional composition, and they are different in terms of physicochemical properties. So the one that is much more present is the brown one, because it's also at least in Scotland is the most common and also easier to harvest, and is also the one that is much more used in consumer trials. So why eating seaweed? First of all, we in Japan, as we know, they already eat seaweeds a lot. So they already eat for almost 5 grams a day. And also because it's one of the main ingredients for their kitchen. And I don't know if it's correlated to this one, but the life expectancy in Japan is quite high. So I don't know. I don't want to make this correlation. I don't want to take it, but I'll just leave it as a food for thought. And while in Britain is very widely available, but there is on the shore of Britain, but we very lack the consumption of seaweeds in UK and also in westernized country. Why? For sure is for palatability issues, probably for culture, because we are not able and we are only associated the taste to a fish smell. So it means if you don't like fish, that's it, you are not going to eat seaweed at all. And maybe, of course, the availability of the seaweed inside the supermarket is quite limited for now. So, of course, this is a catch-22. If there is no consumption, and there is no market demand, you do not have any entrance in the supermarket. So. There is already the use of seaweed in the food industries, but the quantities are small and generally are imported. For example, is already used compound that are product from seaweed. For example, the main things is the ice cream, because sodium alginate is generally a product from seaweed industry, and we already know, as I said before, in the Japanese cuisine we have the sushi nori and all the algae that has been produced for that purpose, but also, for example, in the Starbucks on caramel macchiato, we have our product similar. We have already a lot of carrageenan that is already extracted from seaweed in order to change the texture of a lot of food products. So means that we are already using this type of product, but we are not eating on its own. And of course, when we are extracting compound from it, of course, we are increasing a lot of the carbon footprint. So we need to really push hard in order that we could able to eat seaweed on its own or with a very minimal processing operation with it. So in terms of Abertay University, what we are trying to do for this, or what we have tried, we have some project with seaweed manufacturers. For example, we had a KTP between 2017 and 2018, so some times ago, where one of the main project was to develop seaweed salad and seaweed crisps. And actually, the project was very successful. And we managed to have also a nice consumer likeness of the product that we managed to create, and after the company also managed to sell their product in European countries. And now we are having two innovative projects. One is with the Biomara and one with the Ocean Lab. One is a bread project that I'm going to speak in the details later on, and one is to create a tea project. So I'm going to call a bread project and tea project, otherwise it's going to be slightly more complex. And also we have another project that is on the Fukuoka project. So means these two projects with Biomara, for example, one is using, for example, the bread project. We are developing a bread that contain leftover seaweed from the extraction of Fukuoka, because Fukuoka is another polysaccharides that is fundamental, it's very important with a lot of biological activities. And this company is extracting Fukuoka, that is cost also a decent amount of money for pure. So the byproduct of this seaweed is the seaweed without Fukuoka. So in one project we are understanding how can we give a new life of this byproduct, so means the seaweed without Fukuoka. And the other one we are investigating better functional capabilities of the Fukuoka, or this company Fukuoka, with their new technology of extraction. So what we have done for the first project that I was telling you, that the objective of that study was to understand better some processing techniques on different seaweed species and their impact on the structure and acceptability both on the crisps and on salads. So, and also to help Scottish seaweed in order to try to penetrate European market in order to having a product that could be appealing from European consumers. So what we have done a different type of analysis and different type of task. For example, retardation trials, because we were receiving dried seaweed, and on this we were analyzing water holding capacity, water oil holding capacity, texture and sensory analysis, and so on. And we have done a different formulation in the recipe, and we have done different sensory trials. So for example, we understood that even different type of seaweed, as expected, they act in a different way. For example, as you can see from this slide here, for example, if we have the wakame or the sea spaghetti, they can act in a slightly different way. For example, if we are going to use in seaweed crackers, analyzing the fracturability with the texture analyzer. So this is for example in this other one, we can see is a total different attitude from, for example, the kelp compared to the other seaweeds. This is important also because understanding each seaweed species, how they interact. This will be nice also to having some basic research, but of course basic research need to be funded, and because it can also help to the industry if they want to use a certain type of seaweed as ingredients, to mimicking and to predict how it's going to work with their ingredients. So that could be done with the model system, and sometimes with some prediction modeling, for example, that could be useful as information later on. We have done sensory analysis at Abertay, that are a picture of our sensory spot, and and we can see that of course seaweed, they really lot of them, all of them, they taste so different. So means, and this we have done this type of analysis on scale 1 to 9 hedonic scale, but also we have done with the lower consumers, with the lower number of consumers, we have done the other type of assessment, for example, the temporal dominant sensation, where we have, as I said, the lower participant, but the participant, they are going to taste the product over a period of time, and that they are going to assess what is it the most attribute that is present within the consumer in a certain period of time. And that is a fundamental tools used also for food manufacture in order to use it in new product development, for example. Okay, so and from the sensory analysis, we can see that sometimes is necessary, especially for the likeness of the consumer, some flavor masking in order to having some balancing, for example. So what we have done, we have provided to this company some recipe of seaweed salads. For example, the one that was liked the most was, for example, with the 20% of soy sauce, marine and ginger salads. And for example, the one that probably that was like the least was the one that was 40% of lime, chili, and coconut salad, while the other one they were quite in between, while they were all of them similar. While, for example, as a crisps, we investigated also some lime and chili and coconut for sweet and smoky barbecue. So it means we try to develop a lot of fantasy in order to try to increase the likelihood of the consumer. So now some of them are already present in the Scottish supermarket. So, for example, yesterday I was in Aldi, and I've seen already this brand Shores. That is, we were working with this company, and they're totally gluten-free. They are very low in calories, and they're a source of vitamin and minerals. For example, you can find also the salad. So these products now are already available in the supermarket. So if you want to test them, you can assess also our work that we have done. So in terms of other projects, so that I was speaking before, we have the bread project. So the idea is to really to be able to give a new life of this byproduct of seaweed after the extraction of the fucoidan. So the objective is to understand, of course, the functionality of this byproduct. So what we have done, we have first of all applied different processing technologies to this byproduct, and to understand again the functionality after different processing technology. For example, ultrasound, retort, having milling, and understand, for example, of course, antioxidant activity, amino acid, and so on, but also the water holding capacity, the oil holding capacity, how was it changing, in order to understand how it could be used in the food industry. And speaking about food industry, in this project we have also as a partner McPhee, that is in Aberdeen, that is a factory that is producing ingredient and also product that are used for business to business, for example, for muffin manufacture or bread manufacture. So we have produced some muffin with the seaweeds. We have investigated the amount of leftover seaweed, let's say the byproduct of seaweed that we can add, and we have assessed the consumer acceptability. And now we are making a bread with always with this byproduct of seaweed, and we are going to assess human trials on cardiovascular health and also on in overweight population. So why we have chosen the bread? Because bread is one of staple food and this will be easier to reach a larger population and could be better used for long term and human trials. Of course, Emily can will be able to confirm, but if I say something's wrong with human trials, Emily, please you can just say something. Okay, so for the other project, in this case, we are making a seaweed tea project. So we are going to make this seaweed tea and is going to be to help for the cardiovascular health in the post-menopausal woman. In this case, we are increasing the tea of fucoidan and polyphenols from the seaweed. We are going to use an English breakfast, and we want to make sure that the English breakfast taste of the tea is not altered so much. So our biggest challenge are keeping the taste of and not having so much seaweedy taste. And we are almost able to reach this with a lot of nice chemistry, fermentation, food technologies, and we are assessing with ITEX and GCMS and the consumer testing if we are able to mask. But seems that at the time we are able to mask quite efficiently our tea. So there is not so much fishy English breakfast. Okay, so and of course why tea? Because it is consumed by 78% of the population. So this is another common product, staple food that can help to deliver some great micronutrients. And of course, why postmenopausal women? Because the company that we're working with, they are try to develop sustainable solution for women. They are interested in this, and of course, we are also interested in the cardiovascular risk. So joining with Abertay University has been quite fruitful, and we managed to get this funding. So, okay, now at the stage of the project, we are at the consumer testing because we have managed, as I said, the seaweeds, and we will challenge the tea manufacturer in order to incorporate our seaweed extract, and after we will do a randomized control trial. Another project that is one that I'm involved. That I'm involved always with the company Biomara, that we need to try to maximize the demand of fucoidan. That is a fiber that is extracted from brown seaweed. And so the objective of this study is to move the TRL4 to TRL6 in the fucoidan extraction. And in this case, we are going to use different objectives in order to maximize. For example, in this case, they are going to use a fancy equipment and also their new and patented development way of extraction of the fucoidan, and they are trying to increase, of course, the capability of to extract of this type of compound. Of course, using always green extraction. These include the use of ultrasounds, and especially we are using with Abertay the pilot ultrasound that we have for extraction. And for our work on them is to really try to understand what is the fate of fucoidan after the gut digestion and Caco2 cells and the colonic fermentation, because as we know, probably the fucoidan, we do not have so much enzymes that we are able to absorb a lot of fucoidan. so in gastrointestinal tract, but is going to reach the colon, but is going to help to colonic fermentation to produce a lot of short chain fatty acid. So that's why one of the most important benefit of the fucoidan is to help the colon and the gut microbiota to produce a lot of short chain fatty acids. So thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak, and just introducing our wider team. We have John Wilkin, that is the expert in new product development, and especially working in the seaweed, myself, and Dr. Boon Sen Chan, and that is another senior lecturer in food functionality and processing. John Grigor, that is a senior lecturer in sensory and consumer science, and Sarah Cottin, that she should have been here, that is a lecturer in nutritional science. And of course, and a massive thanks to our research staff that they've been and they are during the time always supporting seaweed project, like Katrina Ross, Vishnu Selmayau, Fazila Munir, Mona Ledbetter, and Matt Ober.